A few weeks back, I had Decisive Point principal James Thomas Coates on the show for a discussion about untapped and often unknown sources of federal biotech funding. Much of that talk centered on little-known biopharma research and development funding mechanisms associated with the U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force. I'm Matt Pillar, and on today's episode of the Business of Biotech, we're talking with the leader of a biopharma company that's been fueled in large part by such federal funding sources, the Army in particular. The company is Longhorn Vaccines and Diagnostics, and my guest today is its co-founder and president, Jeff Fischer. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation. And, I do want to talk about some of the funding mechanisms, the aspects of your relationship with the Army a little bit later, in addition to obviously learning about your important work on vaccines, namely the universal influenza vaccine that Longhorn is working on. But before we get into all that, obviously I'd like to get to know my guests a little bit. And Jeff, I got to tell you, when I look at it on paper, your path to leadership at Longhorn doesn't look like a direct and predictable route. Certainly not as direct and predictable as some of the execs that we have on the show. So I want you to start by telling us a story about how an infantry officer left the Marine Corps. Thank you for your service, by the way.
Yeah.
And just 2 years later, after leaving the Marine Corps, was the chief financial officer at a biopharma company developing monoclonal antibodies called Biosynexis. That's your start. That's your jumping off point, Jeff. I want you to tell us a little story about that guy.
Great. Well, thank you. I left college and went into the Marine Corps. Was an infantry officer for about 4.5 years, and decided to move on into the business world. And so I went to the University of Texas at Austin to get my MBA. And as I was finishing up and looking at job opportunities, mostly in the finance field in either New York or in San Francisco, my father reached out to me and said that he was interested in spinning out a company from the very successful biotech company that he and his colleagues had started about 10 years earlier. And so I looked at the opportunity and saw that much like my time in the Marine Corps, I would be given a lot of responsibility at a very young age, responsibility that in other parts of business would probably have taken me a lot longer to be given the opportunity to take on. And so we decided that it was a good fit. And I moved back to the Washington, D.C. area where I grew up. And the two of us worked together to spin out a company that became Biosynexis, and developed products including monoclonal antibodies for the prevention and treatment of staphylococcal infections.
Yeah. And I want to get into the story around the transition from Biosynexis to Longhorn Vaccines and Diagnostics as well. But when you first joined Biosynexis, when you made that move, what was your role there?
So I actually joined a company called Virion Systems, which was the company that my father and his colleagues had started to take some technology that they had developed in the military that was first technology to demonstrate a way to prevent respiratory syncytial virus infections in premature babies. Because that work was discovered in the military, they had to go out and take it into a private company to move it forward. And so they started a company. They then partnered with a company called MedImmune that took that forward clinically while they provided a lot of the developmental work behind the scenes, ensuring that dosages and other components were correct in the animals. And so that still today is the only prevention for RSV pneumonia that's ever been commercialized.
Yeah.
So we had an opportunity at that point. He wanted to do the same thing, looking for monoclonal antibodies that would prevent staphylococcal infections in that same population. He's a pediatric infectious disease specialist who spent his career trying to treat and prevent infections in premature babies. And so we started a new company that we called Biosynexis. And so my job was to go find the funding for that company so that we could take that company out and make it a standalone company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about your dad's work. You and I had the opportunity to chat a couple of weeks back in advance of this recording, and it occurs to me that your dad did some pretty important work during his tenure doing research and development with the Army. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So my father came back to the Washington, D.C. area in 1977 to be one of the first professors at the military medical school. And as part of that, he also set up the pediatric infectious disease training program for the military, training all three services that have physicians in pediatric infectious diseases. That was in the early 80s, at the same time when HIV was coming out, and so he spent a lot of time working with people at NIH, such as Tony Fauci and others, trying to figure out how to treat HIV, especially in babies. So he did a lot of that work, while at the same time looking for ways to prevent infections and treat infections in these vulnerable populations. And they were doing a study looking at preventing bacterial infections using just immune globulin. And they found success, but they didn't find it on the bacterial side. They found it on the viral side, and that was RSV. And so that was not considered something that should have happened. Previous vaccine trials of RSV vaccines had actually shown that they had a higher mortality rate in the children who received the vaccine than those who received the placebo. And the concern was that antibodies in the face of infection made it worse. And so they were able to flip that dogma, and again, that able to change that disease for premature babies. And that has become a big part of his work. But it was that expertise in antibodies, initially polyclonal antibodies and the monoclonal antibodies, that led to a lot of the work, and now really a lot of what we're doing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, your dad's influence. So, I mean, I look at you and I see a guy who, went to the Marine Corps, perhaps, sort of following your father's legacy of service there. But then you mentioned, you sort of thought in the back of your head you'd come out of the Marine Corps and work in finance. Eventually, you were pulled into the life sciences business by your dad. Tell me about sort of your mindset at the time. What influenced you to make the decisions that you made to make a career in life sciences? And which of those pulls, was the service pull kind of coming from your dad? Was the life sciences pull kind of coming from your dad? What was his influence in the whole sort of transaction at the time?
Well, certainly I grew up in the military. I grew up moving from Army bases in Washington to Hawaii to back here in Washington, D.C. I spent all of basically my life up until I got into the Marine Corps, being on and off of the base. And so that was always something I was going to do, whether it was, I was from that Top Gun generation, that original Top Gun generation who was going to go fly. And so that was probably a partial influence as well. But then it led to me getting in the Marine Corps and realizing that I enjoyed kind of the core of the Marine Corps, the ground side. And that's how I got there. I never was good at science. I never saw a path to being a physician like my father. But when the opportunity to work with him and work with the family, I thought that was a great opportunity for us to work together and spend time together. And again, being given the responsibility at such a young age was great. It led me to grow substantially in my career. I was very, very fortunate that our lead investor in that company, Biosynexis, was one of the co-founders and chief investment officers for the Carlyle Group. He invested in us as a private investment in his own investment, and then served as our chairman, and really served as a mentor to me. And so at a young age, I had access to somebody that really understood the finance industry and understood really kind of how to build companies. And so that was a huge part of my development, transitioning from the military to being a senior executive in a small company.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good transition to some of the questions I have for you around the business of biotech. But first of all, as I said in the intro, thank you again to you and your father, not just for your service in the military, but also for the important work that he's done on the research side.
Thank you.
So you eventually sold venture-backed Biosynexis while it was in phase 2 clinical studies. So tell me a little bit about that and why that decision was made.
We were having tremendous success in the clinic, and we were needed to raise more money, as biotech firms do, and we were having challenges at the board level. We had an investor who initially, when he first came on, seemed like an ideal investor, a physician who had been successful in some earlier venture work, had raised a larger fund, and we were one of his early investments in that fund. As his fund went sideways, and some things in his life went sideways, he put a lot of pressure on us to be able to take funding at levels that really weren't out there in the market. And while we had some great venture-backed partners, it just really kind of turned into a mess as they tried to figure out how we could move forward taking on new funding. And fortunately, because of the success that we had, we were able to find an exit through a hedge fund and move forward. But I think what it led us to realize is that we were making decisions not based on the science, the medicine, but on really what an individual venture partner needed for his fund and his personal needs. And so that was discouraging to us that we were not able to just focus entirely on the medicine and the science.
Yeah. You've told me that you're not particularly put it in polite terms. You're not particularly fond of working with VC firms. Does that experience sort of lie at the root of that aversion to the VC space?
Yeah, I think like any bad relationship, it casts a shadow on the entire process. And so I'm sure that there are wonderful VCs out there, probably most of them. And some of the ones we did work with were great, but it really, on the way out, left us a really bad taste and made sure that at least as we were building the company, we wanted to be independent and wanted to be able to make decisions based again on the science and the medicine. And I think we've been able to do that. I think it's allowed us now to relook at that space, understanding we're going to have to raise a lot of money to take these products through. We may be able to offset some or all of those expenses through our commercial diagnostic division, but it does lead us to look for partners, whether they be venture partners or private equity partners.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see where an experience like that would not jibe with, the integrity, discipline, and objectivity that I'm sure was sort of instilled or ingrained in you during your service in the Marine Corps, and your father as well during his service to the Army.
Absolutely. I think that we, in those positions, you're looking to move things forward under the best decision-making, not necessarily things that involve individuals and financial decisions.
Yeah. So the next stage, as I understand it, in your biopharma business journey was the formation of Longhorn Vaccines and Diagnostics. That was around 2007. So tell us how that came to pass.
Well, after we sold Biosynexis, we were trying to figure out what we should do next, whether we should continue to work together. And so my father came to me and said, we should go after pandemic influenza, which I'd never heard of. I knew about influenza. So he handed me a book on the 1918 flu and said, read this over the weekend. By Monday, we had a plan for building a new company to look for products on the diagnostic side and the vaccine side that would either prevent an influenza pandemic or have an effect on mediating it. And so we started that in 2005, and by 2007, we found a chief scientific officer who had experience developing molecular tools, and then we formed Biosynexis, or we formed Longhorn Vaccines and Diagnostics to really move those products forward. And so my father started working on the developing a universal influenza vaccine. We were never looking to build another seasonal flu vaccine, nor did we think it was valuable to go after a single strain of pandemic influenza, because even though H5N1 was circulating at the time and the most likely one to be a pandemic strain, we felt that it was more important that we could prevent any pandemic from influenza occurring. And so he kept his head down and focused on really building a universal vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first question on that: when you launched Longhorn Vaccines and Diagnostics, was it entirely, given your version to VCs, was it funded entirely in house? As a result of that, the sale of BioSynexis, or how else? Like how did you go about funding the launch of this brand new, two-pronged company?
We decided to take the money that we had in the family from the success of the monoclonal antibody for RSV and some of the money. We did not receive much in the way of funds from the sale of BioSynexis. We ensured that our investors that were in there were fully made whole, made sure that their dividends that they had accrued were fully paid. And so that didn't leave a lot for us, but we had been successful through the original work with the RSV antibody. And so we were able to take those funds and build the company, which was great because it forced us to be lean, it forced us to be focused, and it forced us to realize that every dime we were spending was our own money.
Yeah. We're going to get into some of the success of the diagnostics business and what that's meant as it relates to the development of a universal influenza vaccine. And I'm going to ask you to share some detail on that. But so before I do sort of some foreshadowing, was it a strategic decision to launch this business with these two prongs, to say, the diagnostics business is going to be one thing, the vaccines business is going to be, another, although, albeit related. But it's important that we attempt to develop a business around both as opposed to one or the other. Did you know from the outset that would be strategic? Now, I'm again foreshadowing because as we're going to learn, it was strategic. But was it intentional at the time?
It was intentional because we knew that we've had a lot of experience developing vaccines and monoclonal antibodies, and we know that it's a long road and it takes time. And at the time, we didn't even have an approach. We knew what we were looking for, but we weren't even sure how we were going to get there on the vaccine side. The opposite was true on the diagnostic side. We had an approach and we knew where we were going. We found the right team to put together to build what we were looking for. And so we were a little bit ahead of our time. We decided that we were going to focus the diagnostic team on molecular tools to diagnose at an early stage this pandemic influenza. And that's really where both of our military experience came in. We knew that a pandemic was going to likely begin in Asia. That's where they tend to begin, as we've seen with SARS-CoV-2. And we needed products that could work in really kind of rural, challenging conditions where, and that both of us had seen. My father, very much so when he was doing his tropical medicine training in Thailand during the Vietnam War, and spending time in very rural parts of that part of the world. I had spent time in the Marine Corps in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And so we certainly were understanding of what challenges we were going to be facing. And so what we knew, though, is that we could get those products to market much quicker than a vaccine. And so that would allow us to not hopefully have to fund the company as long, and that the diagnostic division would be able to fund a lot of the vaccine development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an amazing illustration of the application of real-world experience to the business plan, and a lot of that real-world experience coming from you and your father's service in the armed forces. So the success of the diagnostics business was sort of fueled, I'm assuming, through the H1N1, TB, and COVID pandemics. Tell me about, I guess, the influence of those epidemics on the growth of the diagnostics business.
So fortunately we were able to develop the tools that we were looking to make. And so we developed them. We were able to do some initial clinical work prior to the H1N109 pandemic. And we were able to show is that the diagnostic tools we built could diagnose not just early stage influenza infection, but even asymptomatic stage infection. And so we had just finished some studies and published some data on that when the H1N109 pandemic hit. And so that was one of the first uses, if not the first use, that the FDA put of emergency use authorization. Mm-hmm. And so we went through that process, which was very extensive, especially for a small company like ours. And we were able to get emergency use authorization. Unlike this pandemic, there were very few companies that went through the process. Out of the 18, with us being one of the 18, I think at least 10 of them were government EUAs, CDC, right, and the military, and multiple CDC and military EUAs. Molecular just really wasn't the core testing at the time. And so, but by the time we got our approval in place, our authorization in place, the pandemic had really kind of fizzled out. And I think, unfortunately at the time for us, as well as really for the ability for governments to prepare for pandemics, I think the belief was that maybe pandemics weren't going to be as bad, that the H1N1 was a sign of what a pandemic looked like in the age of modern medicine. And
how little we knew.
Yeah. And so we decided that the U.S. market was not yet ready for molecular testing for influenza. And so we went looking for a pandemic. And we found was that outside of the U.S. and outside of most parts of Europe, tuberculosis was a pandemic, and an everyday pandemic. And we felt that the tools we had built for influenza would serve the tuberculosis field well. And at the same time, the tuberculosis community was looking to switch over to molecular testing because tuberculosis takes a long time to grow. And so diagnosis was often delayed by a month or more. And so to do good quality diagnosis, they needed better tools, faster tools, and we felt that we had those tools. Unfortunately, we faced a lot of headwinds from the community who had ideas on how they wanted to do things and questioned a lot of the claims that we were making, even though they were backed by peer-reviewed science. And so in 2018 or 2016, we approached the FDA about taking our product, our lead product, Prime Store Molecular Transport Media, through the 510K process so that the FDA, the world's leader in determining quality and efficacy, would be able to tell the world that what we were saying was true. And so we approached them, and they looked at our technology and said that it was novel. It was something that they didn't have another product that was similar enough for us to compare to. And so we worked with the FDA to develop a new category of device. And so we put through what's called a de novo product. And so it became the device that all similar devices had to compare themselves to. And so we completed that process with the FDA in 2018, and then went about trying to convince the laboratory community, the diagnostic community, that this was a better product, better collection device, and one that that they should be using in front of their molecular tests. We were in that process. We had signed up Fischer Scientific as a clinical distributor. Things were starting to move forward when the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic hit. And the FDA called us before an emergency had been declared by WHO, before the President of the United States had declared an emergency, and said, this is what we worked on together to get you cleared. we don't want you to do any additional testing. We don't want you to file any EUAs. We just want you to produce as much of this as you can. And the Health and Human Services need you. We need you, and we're here as a partner, and we'll work closely with you to get what you need.
So this is going to be a difficult question for you to answer, Jeff. So I'll give you that warning right off the bat. You just outlined. I'm thinking of three specific things you just outlined. The EUA as a very young company, a 2-year-old company achieving an EUA, which those are few and far between, much less doled out to 2-year-old companies. The de novo status, and then the unanticipated third pandemic, if you will, that led to the FDA coming back to you and saying, hey, let's get together and solve some problems here. Those three things, it occurs to me, are illustrative of some sort of influence, ability, skill. I'm not sure what to call it. That's part of the question around dealing with federal regulatory bodies. So tell us about that. Like, why has Longhorn had, what's behind that, I guess, success in from a very early stage in its existence through today? What's behind that success in moving quickly and nimbly with regulatory agencies? I warned you it was going to be a tough question to answer.
No, I think one of the great things that we've done going back is, through previous companies and through today, is that we believe in very good science. We believe in pushing the science to its limits. We believe in transparency and peer-reviewed documents, peer-reviewed articles. And so we have always been willing to show our science and show what we've done. At the same time, we also have hired great people and let them do what they do. So even though we've been small, everybody has the ability to do more than often a larger team could do. And then we rely on them to do what it is that they do. But in working with the regulatory agencies, there were times when we had to push back very hard on certain things. But what we did it in a way where we showed our cards and we showed them why. And we were able to explain to them by laying everything out and getting them comfortable that we weren't doing this because it was going to make us more money, or that it was that we were hiding something to get what we were looking for. We worked on it by educating them and allowing them to educate us, and then working together to find that way of getting to the finish line. And that's really how we got through the de novo process. We had to help them get past a comfort zone. And once they got there, then it became a partnership, and really one that's continued to this day, where I still keep in touch with several of the reviewers that we worked through this process. And I think that's what also led them to reach out to us in the early stage of the pandemic, is they knew that they could trust us, that we would be doing things in a way that followed the science.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The Business of Biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech.
Yeah. All right. One last, maybe not one last, couple more questions on sort of that growth of the diagnostics business, and then I want to get into the vaccine candidate. You just mentioned that you're a small team. You're 14 employees. Is that correct?
That's about right.
Yeah. So about 14 employees, and yet during COVID, your diagnostics business went from making 50,000 units per year of sample collection units. So that was 2019, 50,000 per year. In 2020, you're producing 50 million Did I get those numbers right?
Yeah, that's we dramatically were able to increase our production. We could have done more. We were one of the challenges we faced was some of the components that we needed, and then there were a couple of other issues that came up with some third parties that outside of our control that had nothing to do with us. But we were in a position to just really expand quickly.
So tell me a little, give me
I was
some
going to say, and we were being called daily by Health and Human Services and FDA, pushing us harder and harder to get to higher numbers and having them give us the tools when we needed them to get there.
Like what sort of tools?
Well, we were in a situation where our supplier of our test tubes, of our collection tubes, was a Canadian company, and they really weren't looking to expand, and we needed a specific type of tube. And so the Health and Human Services reached out, found the two companies in the United States that produced that type of tube, and had all of their capacity sent to us. So that was helpful. And then when even that wasn't enough, they reached out to some of the national labs like Los Alamos and said, how do we make tubes for this company? And so they helped us find solutions very quickly that weren't necessarily ideal for the long term, but helped fill a very important gap. And so that led to really one of the unique collaborations during the pandemic, where we were working with the largest Coca-Cola bottling company to receive components of a plastic bottle that in its early stage looks just like a test tube and acts just like a test tube. And because Coca-Cola has to ship product all over the world at all different temperatures and keep their stuff carbonated, it was an ideal tube from knowing that we wouldn't have problems with leaking or cap issues. And so it ended up being a great partnership that helped states especially get through some of the early testing where there was a lot of supply chain issues with getting sample collection devices.
So you're telling me that you're leveraging raw materials, like not yet formed Coca-Cola bottles, to meet supply chain distribution needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was that's where working with smart people, in this case, a brilliant scientist at one of the national labs, who instead of being stuck 6 weeks later trying to build a new mold realized that there was a solution already on the table, and it worked great. And so we were very thankful that again, this was a great opportunity for us to work with government and really smart people in government to make quick decisions.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. I want to, I could ask you questions. I'd love to ask you more questions about that. Like, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall during those negotiations and those early discussions. Like, hey, let's go talk to Coca-Cola. But we're gonna run short on time, and I want to make sure we spend some time talking about this universal influenza vaccine candidate, which right now you're preparing for clinical trials for that candidate, which. I guess we'll start with the obvious. A universal vaccine candidate is something that's been bantied about for quite some time now. A lot of companies have tried it. A lot of companies continue to try it. A lot of companies working on that concept. I think we use the term, it's the Holy Grail, and everybody likes to use that term, but if you stop and think about the term, the Holy Grail, it's called the Holy Grail. I guess the whole analogy is this thing's never been found. So what makes you think that that you can be the company that cracks that nut that where so many others have failed and where so many others are currently trying?
Well, first of all, we didn't rush into this. So we came up with this plan in 2005. And so we're sitting here in 2022 just getting ready to go into the clinic. And that's because, to your point, this is not an easy thing to go after. And so we didn't want to go after it with a weak product. And I think that there have been a lot of approaches taken, and we've learned a lot from those approaches. We've learned a lot from other vaccines that are on the market now. We've learned a lot from the vaccines that have been developed and used for SARS-CoV-2. And so one of the things that we know, and that I think the general population knows now, is that viruses mutate very easily, very quickly, and against things that scientists didn't think they could mutate against. And so the approach that we've taken is to not pick a single target, not to pick two targets, but multiple targets, multiple key targets. We've looked at over 2,000 different strains of influenza, and we picked key components that are conserved across all 2,000 of those strains. And so a lot of people go after the hemagglutinin or against the M2E matrix, but they really don't necessarily go after both of them. And so we've found two targets on the hemagglutinin, one on the neuraminidase, and two on the M2E matrix. And all of these targets on their own generate neutralizing antibodies. And so we know that the virus, instead of mutating against one of them, would have to mutate against all of them, and all of them at the same time, and really would have to change its core substance to try and evolve around all of them. Additionally, we have put a T-cell epitope on one of our peptides to further build the long-term immunity, the durability that obviously we all wish we would be seeing on these SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, so we wouldn't have to get them every so often. And then on top of that, we believe that adjuvants play a key role in getting good response and good durability. And so we've been able to partner with what we believe is the best adjuvant currently available. And that's the one that the U.S. Army, Walter Reed Army Institute of Research team has developed. And they are really one of the top, if not the top adjuvant group in the world, having been doing this for over 30 years, just with the team that they have. This is a team that has their previous adjuvant is used in GlaxoSmithKline's Shingrix vaccine, which is probably one of the most successful vaccines ever developed, and has really made a difference for shingles in the world, and is one that I've had. And we've really built a vaccine that focuses on all components of immunity and develops a real balanced immune response that we believe will both be successful and durable.
You just referenced that relationship with the Army, and I want to ask you a few questions about that as it relates to the vaccine candidate. So what, I guess, kind of frame up for me what support you do receive from the Army as you work on that? Is it funding? Is it expertise? Is it science? Like, what does sort of that relationship look like?
So really, most of their support is expertise, science, access to their adjuvants for our vaccine technology, and really the level of expertise. If we were to go out into the community and have to find that at a corporation would triple our budget. And so being able to work with them, we bring the composite peptide vaccine, they bring the adjuvant, and together we've worked to build it, to optimize it, to test it. And now as we go into the clinic, the U.S. Army has decided that influenza is a priority for them, as they've seen with the COVID pandemic and the role that it's played on readiness. We've seen COVID blow through Navy ships and other units and really create readiness issues. They're realizing that this is a concern that influenza could do this at some point as well. Mm-hmm. So they've made their clinical trial site available to us. It's something we pay for. But it's one of the leading phase 1 clinical trial sites, And having access to that and then having access to their clinical trial sites all over the world really allows us to rapidly move this forward with groups that have done a lot of infectious disease vaccine work. And so the expertise there is really second to none.
I'm going to ask you to share some advice, some insight or advice with our listeners, leaders of other emerging biopharma companies who may be interested in leveraging some of those resources. Because the skeptical, the more skeptical or cynical perhaps of my listeners might be thinking like, well, yeah, I mean, Longhorn has access to all these great resources at the Army because, Jeff Fischer's father was a super well-respected and influential Army physician, and he's got tons of connections and friends there. Why wouldn't you think that? So beyond that, give us some thoughts on, what it takes, what the approach might look like to develop and maintain a relationship with an organization like the Army that benefits the development and testing and trials of particularly a candidate that might have applicability to the Army, might be a vested interest of the Armies. Does the question make sense?
It does. I think that there are definitely ways to reach out to the Army. There are portals and other ways of getting to key people. I think the importance is you have to come with a lot of science, and you have to come with a lot of credibility behind your science. And it has to be something that benefits the military as well. It cannot be a relationship where you're leveraging the military for your benefit, but it doesn't benefit them as well. And I think that I would not approach them specifically looking for money. They have expertise and they have technologies that are as good as anywhere in the world. And I think that trying to learn and understand what those technologies are and how that can interface with products that another company might be developing, I think is something that is worth doing. I think it is important to understand that the military is everywhere in the world. So they have labs all over the world. They have clinical trial sites all over the world. And they're very much on the front line of what's going on. And so the ability to take advantage of that knowledge is really helpful to us, and I think could be to a lot of other companies as well. But if you're going into it thinking that it's a way to pay for all of your work or it's a way to raise your profile, I think that's the wrong reason to go into it. I think the right reason to go into it is because there's a lot of benefit and a lot of intelligence and experience there. And that's true of a lot of the HHS and some of their components, either CDC or FDA. There's a lot of technology and expertise there that can be tapped. And I think that people should look at that and understand that the government can be helpful and not just what we consider a regulatory challenge to overcome. Yeah,
that's well said. Excellent way to put that. So I want to talk a little bit more about the vaccine itself. You just referenced the value of an universal influenza vaccine to an organization like the Army or the Navy, where we see these pandemics, epidemics for that matter, have profound consequences on our readiness. Share a little bit more about why the universality, aspect of your vaccine candidate is so important at this point in time. Why is it not okay to just kind of move forward with seasonal tweaks, I guess, to the vaccine the influenza vaccine manufacturing paradigm, as we've been doing for so many years?
Well, I think, again, much like we're seeing with the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines and what we've seen with seasonal flu vaccines for decades, is that we're always a little bit behind the virus. And so some years we're closer and some years we're a long ways away. And so seasonal vaccines for influenza have shown efficacy in the range of 15 to 70%, depending on the year. And so I think the general public is becoming more and more skeptical of
Yeah.
of why I'm getting a vaccine that I'm still going to end up getting sick. And I think that vaccines are going to have to be better. They're going to have a much higher efficacy rate, a much higher rate of keeping people from getting symptomatic infection. And I think that's where the universality comes, so that you're not chasing the virus, you're staying ahead of the virus. And there are so many different potential strains of influenza out there. When you start looking at the combinations of different hemagglutinins and neuraminidase, I mean, there are untold numbers of potential strains of influenza that could jump from animal to human tomorrow. And I think that is a concern. One of the benefits of this vaccine, and we've really transitioned to a One Health company, because an influenza vaccine, a universal influenza vaccine, has tremendous applicability in the human side, but also in the animal side, whether it be pigs or waterfowl or poultry or others, where you need to maybe take it down at the source. I mean, we've seen the price of eggs and chicken and other poultry go up because of outbreaks of H5N1 avian influenza. This is a universal vaccine that could have impact on all aspects of life. And I think that that's something that we're super excited about. And again, why it needs to be robust, why it needs to be not just chasing the virus, but getting ahead of the virus.
Yeah, no, excellent point. Yeah, and the point's not lost on sort of the marketability, if you will, to the public. You know, the COVID vaccine effort has been a huge blessing and a giant curse in terms of public perception of vaccine efficacy and durability, without a doubt. And that creates a challenge for companies like yours moving forward to, leaning into the science, assuming that the science works and is proven, the efficacy and the durability are both there, and the universality of the candidate is what you hope it to be. You still face an uphill battle creating or changing, I guess that is, public perception around the V word, right?
We do, and I think that I think that it's something that we're excited about, because we believe that we've got a vaccine that will be very functional and very durable. And I think that having that type of vaccine, being able to compare more to a Shingrix vaccine, where you get a shot and you don't expect to get the disease, and you don't have to, you get 2 doses up front, and then you don't get them every year. You may go 5, 10, 15 years without getting another dose. And I think that's what we're going for. And I think that the community, society is going to embrace vaccines that are patterned in that way, that offer actual protection and have long-term durability. And I think that that's a great opportunity. And then on top of that, each one of our targets generates monoclonal antibodies that can be combined into a cocktail to then treat influenza. And what we saw that very early in the pandemic, that the antibody cocktails were very important for keeping people alive that either got it before vaccines were available or got it after vaccines were available and weren't vaccinated. So we see that side of the business as crucial as well. But we believe that vaccine trust can be rebuilt with the right vaccines. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions, then I'm going to let you off the hook. We're running short on time here, Jeff. But one of the questions I have for you is around scale up, like your anticipation of your ability to scale. So should this vaccine candidate, the universal influenza vaccine candidate, make its way to approval and commercialization? We talked earlier about how you moved your diagnostic product from 50K to 50 million in the course of 12 months, which is incredible. When we talk about a universal influenza vaccine, and then you introduce the concept of One Health and you bring, chickens and pigs into the mix, that is some incredibly next level potential for scale up. So what's your anticipation there? I know it's very forward looking, but what's your anticipation there in terms of your ability and also the industry's ability to scale up a vaccine that would be, create demand of probably untold magnitude?
Well, one of the things we learned in the diagnostic side is having good partners was crucial. And one of the benefits we had in the early scale up of our sample collection technology was that we were working with a manufacturer that could take us from making 30-liter batches to 800-liter batches in about a 6-week period. We were able to make that jump. And then they were able to make multiple of those a day and then really allow us to scale up. So when we went out looking for GMP manufacturers for our peptides, we wanted to find those same groups, that somebody who could, if tomorrow we needed to go from making a kilogram to making 10 to 100 kilograms a week, they could do that. And so we found that the other thing that was important to us that we learned from the pandemic is that capability better be here in the United States. And so we've been able to do that here in the United States. And they do have facilities overseas as well. So for serving the rest of the world, that can also be done there. I think one of the nice things is that peptide manufacturing is pretty well understood. It's not a complicated process. It's something that could be transferred fairly easily to other facilities. And so we feel very comfortable that the scaling process will not be a problem. Additionally, we see excellent results at very low doses. We're looking at some of our early animal studies have shown that transdermal delivery at very low doses could be the path. And we're seeing that right now with the monkeypox, where the government is splitting the doses by 5 times, cutting it a single dose into 5 doses and then going transdermal. That's an approach that we had already been looking at and see success with. And so I think that looking at ways of delivering it to help build that scale are important. One of the nice things in pigs is pig skin and human skin are very similar. And so the ability to do a lot of learning in pigs, because that's a key market for us, also helps our understanding of how to maybe deliver this vaccine to the U.S. and around the world, especially places where needles can be challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. So tell us about your preparations for the clinic. Where are you now?
Well, we're preparing to file our pre-IND with the FDA. Unfortunately, the FDA is pretty backed up right now with a lot of the SARS-CoV-2 work that's still ongoing, the challenge of getting new vaccines out. And so we're getting that document in and working back with feedback. We're finishing up our GMP manufacturing so that we'll have doses that can go into humans. And so the hope is that all goes well with the FDA and we should be in the clinic in the first half of 2023.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Fortunately with that, a lot of the key data will come out in the first 4 or 5 months of the study. The ability to see whether we get those same levels of neutralizing antibodies in humans that we've seen in animals, the ability to find out whether we're getting the same T-cell responses in humans that we see in animals, and start to see those signs of durability that we expect to see. These are the things that we expect to see in this first trial and really understand how this vaccine is going to work in humans very quickly, as well as to see how different doses change those outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very exciting. What's next beyond? So that, we've talked quite a bit about the diagnostics business, where you are right now with that vaccine candidate. Is that keeping the plate pretty full right now at Longhorn, or is there sort of some forward-looking product news you can share with us?
Yeah, well, I think we're excited that we have a lot of focus on moving that into the clinic, but behind it, we continue to think bold and universal and key diseases, and we've got some technology using the same vaccine technologies, but some targets that we believe maybe we could put together a universal bacteria vaccine that would cover both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, as well as tuberculosis, all in one vaccine. And so a lot of it goes back to knowledge that we had from our previous company, as well as really kind of how we build vaccines now. And so I think that we're very excited about that. It's still somewhat early, but the initial signs are really good. And we're fortunately pulled together a lot of our old team from people that we've worked with in our last company, and really are excited about where this might go.
Yeah. Very good. Well, it's a great story. It's an exciting story. It's one I definitely want to follow along with. So, 2023 is going to be a big year, especially that first quarter. We'll be paying attention and cheering you on for sure. Wishing you all the best.
Well, thank you. It's it's an exciting time. I think we're all a little excited to come out of hopefully the main phase of the COVID pandemic, while we continue to support it. But I think that there's a lot of need and a lot of focus now on preventing the next big outbreaks, and so we're excited to hopefully be a big part of that.
Yeah, well, great. Thanks for coming on the show, Jeff. I've enjoyed the conversation, and
thank you for having me.
As I said, we'll be following along. We'll probably want to have you back on at some point.
I would love that. Thank you very much.
All right. So that's Longhorn Vaccines and Diagnostics co-founder and president, Jeff Fischer. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva. Visit cytiva.com/emerging biotech to dive into a host of resources the company offers to early stage biopharma companies. Please visit bioprocessonline.com, where I invite you to subscribe to my newsletter. And if you're enjoying these conversations with biotech leaders, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. Leave us a review. And as always, thanks for listening.